Visit speechinthesilence.com for future programs, news, music, and more.
Hi there, I'm Joseph Thebus, and it's my great pleasure today to be sitting with Jeva Singh-Anand, one of the world's foremost translators of the rituals of the Bavarian Illuminati. Jeva has a book soon to be released entitled The Secret School of Wisdom, The Authentic Rituals and Doctrines of the Illuminati. We're at a little coffee and dessert place in southeast Portland, Oregon, on a lovely warm spring evening. The flowers are all in bloom, and the place is bustling with activity. Jeva, thanks for meeting with me today and sharing with all our listeners a little bit about the Illuminati.
Thanks for having me.
So tell me how you got involved with this project.
Well, what I've been doing for, say, the last 4 years now is I've been working as a freelance translator. And the Illuminati and conspiracy theories were always something that just kind of fascinated me, but I didn't really get all that much involved in them.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day, a couple of years ago, I was approached by a client. He had a document by Adam Weishaupt, who was the founder of the Illuminati, that he wanted me to translate. It was one of his apologetic writings in response to a sex scandal that he was allegedly involved in. You know, by today's standards, it wasn't really a big deal, but it was turned into something really awful. His wife was dying from a prolonged illness. Weishaupt and his wife decided what would be the best course of action because they did have children.
Right.
She suggested that, well, hey, look, the kids know my sister, why don't you go ahead and marry her? So it was something that they both kind of decided together. She dies, the time of mourning passes, and because Weishaupt he was a Catholic living in Bavaria, so he decided that he was going to do the right thing. Problem was that he had to get, because of the risque family relationships, he wasn't a blood relative obviously, but because of the family situation, they had to send a petition to Rome, get permission from the Pope to make sure that everything was legit. Well, finally he gets a letter saying, okay, it's only going to be weeks and you'll get the dispensation. Weishaupt and his sister-in-law decide to celebrate. The dispensation doesn't come. She misses a period. And they're just kind of like, you know, sitting on pins and needles, waiting for the dispensation to come any day now.
Right.
Months go by, she's starting to show. Now, what he does next is he writes to his friends in the order, hey, look, you know, I kind of researched canon law, and it says that in certain circumstances it is okay to get an abortion even if you're Catholic. Do you have any chemical recipes to do that? Well, his doctor's friends totally refused to go there. They didn't think it was ethical. They felt it was dangerous, not only for the child, but also for the mother.
Sure.
And so some people said, hey, look, yeah, I got some recipes, but I'm not going to tell them to them. I'm not going to tell them to you. After the Illuminati were exposed, that exchange made public, and it became a seriously huge scandal. So that was the document, his 80-page response. It was translates roughly as a brief justification of my intentions. He's basically defending his character. Then the next document that I translated was this book right over here, Philo's reply to questions concerning his association with the Illuminati. It was originally written in 1788 by Baron Adolf Knigge. And Knigge was, he was one of the literary greats of 18th century Germany. So he only lived to be about 46 years old. He's best known for his book on human relations, which is actually a treatise on human behavior, but in the German-speaking world, it's considered to be the standard work on etiquette. Knigge was a Freemason. He was a spiritual seeker, fascinated with secret societies, and he wanted to make a name for himself in Freemasonry. What was really interesting about this book is that it's kind of like, as the scandal escalated throughout Europe and more names were exposed, there was Knigge. He was like one of Germany's literary darlings, you know. There's maybe only one contemporary that's even one or two. One of them happens to be Goethe, who also happened to be an Illuminati. So all these speculations go around, and finally, you know, people ask, his own friends ask him, "Were you involved with these Illuminati?" And finally says, "Yeah, I was involved with the Illuminati, and here's what I did, here's what happened, here's why I left them."
And that's this book, Philo's Reply.
Exactly. And what he does is, in about 120 pages or so, he outlines the system. He talks about what were the goals of the Illuminati, why he left the Illuminati, and what his own ideas were for that order. Before Knigge came to the Illuminati, they were just a couple of dozen, and if he would have never joined the order, chances are they probably would have just kind of petered out. But he was well connected. He was really enthusiastic. He liked Weishaupt's ideas. Weishaupt and Knigge were very different personalities. Knigge wanted to match the system much more closely to Freemasonry.
I see.
And number two, Weishaupt had kind of like a monarchic vision of the organization, whereas Knigge thought that maybe something like a republic would be a better idea. Knigge saw that the structure of the Illuminati did offer potential for abuse. He wanted to have some safeguards built in.
Right.
And in the end, it just ended up being an argument over Masonic terminology. Weishaupt thought it was silly. Knigge thought it was meaningful. He had basically rewritten almost the entire degree system of the Illuminati. Weishaupt says, "All right, this looks great." Everything gets printed or copied and distributed. A couple of weeks later, Weishaupt changes his mind. He says, "You know what? We got to make some changes." Meanwhile, Knigge has made all these changes, put in all this work at his own expense, and he's like, "You got to be kidding me!"
So Knigge rewrote all of the rituals. Now, tell me about how the Illuminati got started. Like, what were the rituals that Weishaupt originally wrote, and what was the relationship between the Illuminati and Freemasonry when it got started?
Okay. The Weishaupt had basically written the first 2 or 3 degrees. After that, that was all he'd written until Knigge arrived. The ritual actually evolved between 1776 and 1785-88 several times. Got changed. The upper degrees, the mystery degrees, actually weren't written until after Knigge left. They came into being as a result of the struggle for academic freedom in Bavaria.
Academic freedom.
That's what started it.
Interesting.
For since about 1549, the Jesuits were basically running the educational system in Bavaria.
Right.
They were also very skilled politicians, court advisors, diplomats. They were extremely eloquent, and so they basically got the ears and hearts of the rulers in Bavaria. And they also practiced what I call showboat education. first-year Latin students composing great epics.
Oh, uh-huh. Sure.
You know?
Right.
It turns out that, and I'm basing this on the research by a Bavarian historian named August Kolkon, who wrote 3 very important topics on the Jesuits in Bavaria and the history of education in Bavaria leading up to the arrival of the Illuminati. So they were practicing showboat education, the Jesuits. First-year Latin students produced these great epics, which, turns out later, were written by the teachers.
Oh.
So this goes on for about 200 years. So Weishaupt gathers a group of some really smart, idealistic students around him. Some of them, like Xavier Zwack, who would later become, after the Illuminati were disbanded, become an important political figure in Bavarian history. He gathers those around him, and he says they decide that they want to change the system without the use of external force. So they wanted to do it kind of non-violent. It was a commitment to non-violence, and they basically, throughout their existence, renounced the use of violence to overthrow governments and things like that. But what they started doing, and that was, I want to say that's the one big criticism that I have of Weishaupt's ideas. He decides to model it on the Jesuit order, and he decides to play the same game that the Jesuits play. So basically it's a thing of fighting fire with fire. A couple of years before he starts thinking about founding the Illuminati, played with Rosicrucianism, alchemy, Freemasonry. Didn't really get into it all that much. His disappointments with alchemy and Rosicrucianism would lead him later to just go whole hog in trying to discredit what we would call practical or operative occultism.
What was the problem that he had with or the disappointment you described? What was that?
He basically thought they were frauds. He liked the philosophy behind it, but he thought that the experiments would distract them. He saw that a lot of really bright young minds were also being pulled away by this lure of making gold. Now, in the meantime, one of the major Freemasonic rites is in its death throes. It was the rite of strict observance. The founder of the rite, Baron von Hund, was apparently contacted by people that were working on orders of the unknown superiors. Later, Masonic and other historians found out, discovered that, well, von Hund was actually, he was basically an honest person, but he was a little gullible, and he might have been duped by one of the many Tudor rebellions. So, what happens, because there's all this talk about unknown superiors, people start showing up with charters saying, hey, look, the unknown superiors told me that you're supposed to do this. Or, hey, look, I've got these great occult secrets that I can sell you for a modest fee. Which resulted in people actually getting bilked out of fortunes.
Right.
So there's these unknown superiors that are supposedly, like, in their name, a lot of mischief was made. A lot of respectable Freemasons are getting more and more disillusioned with this. And finally, 1783, there's a huge convention in a at Wilhelmsbad. It's called the Wilhelmsbad Convention. That's where they talk about, hey, look, what exactly does Freemasonry have to do with the Knights Templar, which is what these unknown superiors claimed Freemasonry's origin was.
Right.
We invite these unknown superiors to show up and, furnish some proof. Obviously, they never showed up.
Right.
There was no proof brought up that Freemasonry ever had anything to do with the Knights Templar, and basically the strict observance rite was declared invalid. So the Illuminati thought that, hey, this chaos would actually be pretty good to kind of see what we can do with Freemasonry. Knigge and Weishaupt were both kind of disillusioned with the state of Freemasonry at that time. Knigge thought that, hey, here's this wonderful Illuminati system. He really believed in it. Let's go ahead and see if we can kind of replace the strict observance, use the Illuminati system as a right to unite Freemasonry, and we can use Freemasonry, we can make Freemasonry really, really do something.
So what revelations are there in the new book that you think people will be interested in?
First of all, it's the entire ritual. It contains material that was published at the high command of the Bavarian government to expose them, to expose all their secrets and stuff. But it also contains material that hasn't been published yet. So from a historical point of view, from a historian's point of view, it's absolutely fascinating stuff. Now, the other thing is that just looking at the ritual itself, just about everything that conspiracy theorists have said about the Illuminati is exactly the opposite of what they actually stood for. It's almost uncanny.
Really? Interesting.
Yes.
Like, give me an example.
All right, the occult conspiracy. They did everything they could to discredit practical occultism. They ran the Rosicrucians out of Ingolstadt and a couple of other towns in Bavaria. In fact, Weishaupt hired Knigge to write one of his pamphlets called about Jesuits, Rosicrucians, and German Freemasons. Rosicrucians are basically shown as total frauds. Interestingly, the Jesuits are portrayed as like the sinister cabal of assassins.
Wow.
And I forget what he says.
The shock troops of the papacy.
Yeah, stuff like that, you know. So they had a very dim view on practical or operative occultism. When it comes to esoteric or hermetic philosophy, different story. But I don't like bringing this up without carefully defining how the terms like esotericism and hermeticism, because there's an operative part of the esoteric tradition, and then there's metaphysics and esotericism as a branch of philosophy. And that's where you get people like, say, the Stoics. That's where you get people like the idealists, Platonists, all these guys. Now, if we define it this narrowly, metaphysics and esoteric ideology, yes, they were very much into that. But when it comes to stuff like astrology, redesigning the tarot, goetic evocations, things like that, they had a very, very dim view on that.
Interesting.
The other thing, it just totally blew my mind, was the whole thing on all this talk about their global depopulation agenda.
Oh, uh-huh.
And I've actually got a part. It's actually from one of the higher degrees. It's the Magus degree.
Uh-huh.
Just a short section. It kind of explains their stance on population growth and depopulation. And that's actually written by Weishaupt himself. It says, "It must seem more remarkable when it is shown that the more distant reason for the entire national and human enlightenment of the entire non-scientific culture is always based on the larger or lesser number of nations and men, that it waxes and wanes with this number. At all times, countries poor in citizens were also poor in culture and enlightenment. As their populations increased, they also increased in these things. These days, entire nations, especially the national capitals, serve as a living proof of this fact."
Wow. So it almost sounds like advocating higher population.
Exactly. They felt that larger numbers of higher populations would encourage competition due to the scarcity of resources. Therefore, it would teach people to treat their resources more sensibly. It would encourage emigrating to unexplored parts of the world. And at that time in the 18th century, there were still wide sections that were still vastly unpopulated. And basically bringing civilization to the uncivilized parts of the world. Now you got to keep in mind, those were a bunch of 18th century German boys, and that's what they thought at the time was good. Had they existed 200 years longer, they might have changed their mind on that.
Right, sure.
You know.
Very interesting. So, we talked a little bit about the philosophical principles of the Illuminati. What other principles do they have? It sounds like they're for enlightenment, for science, the early days of science as a discipline in itself. But
very much so. They were sworn enemies to superstition and inequality. They felt that in a perfectly ordered society, everyone would be able to do what they did best. And I think it's probably a stretch to say that they advocated meritocracy. But it was definitely one of the things that it was somewhere in the ballpark.
Got it. I see.
I think their ideal world was kind of this a return to the tribal societies, patriarchal tribes. They were not feminists.
Right.
I think it was still too early for feminism at that point, you know.
Sure.
But they advocated a patriarchal tribal society.
Interesting.
Where people would not necessarily live without any property at all, but were this gross inequality between rich and poor would not exist. They were very much against concentrating too much power, too much property in the hands of a few, which is another thing that conspiracy theorists say. Well, they want to concentrate all the power and wealth.
Oh, right.
You know. They advocated science, and they were kind of a network, or that was at least the plan, that they kind of wanted to be a network of amateur and professional scientists who would do research, become a storehouse of scientific knowledge, and as they saw humanity or society being ready for some knowledge, they would go ahead and divulge that from their vast storehouse of knowledge. The idea was also that through a gradually implemented regimen of morals that just by educating people, people would become better. That's what the original name of the Illuminati, Perfectibilists, was actually all about.
Interesting.
Except Weishaupt thought that name was way too hard to say, so he just decided to change it to Illuminati.
Probably onto something there.
Yeah, I mean, you try to say that 3 times real fast, you know.
Right. Let's see. So, what other questions do I have? Well, was there any other points you wanted to bring up in this discussion, or do you have some reading you'd like to do from the book?
Let's see here. Actually, I've got a really, really cool section from the Rex degree, which is also known as the Docetus degree.
Okay.
The whole document is like 24 pages long or something, so I'm just going to read like a couple of points from that.
Okay.
And it's a really interesting way of applying cognitive theory to idealist philosophy. So you've got like your scientific approach to exploring philosophy, to exploring religion. So that's maybe another reason why Weishaupt would be considered a Gnostic saint.
Got it.
Now, this degree was known, that was the highest degree, only about a dozen or so people ever got to read it. It was a most closely guarded secret. So here it is. 1, that we cannot penetrate into the inner nature of beings, the creation of world, and its main components. 2, that any creature's impression, be it constituted in the same or another manner, is essentially nothing more than the action of external factors on creatures constituted thusly, and not in any other manner. 3, that any change to this constitution, no matter how unremarkable, must necessarily incur an authentic change proportionate to its cause, in a perception in the being that perceives and feels. 4, that every person, due to his natural or artificial senses, whether they are heightened or reduced, is always right, that no one is deceived by his different impressions, no matter how great these differences may be, even if his impressions are different from those of all others, because he perceives and sees things as his constitution permits, nor will others see them differently. 5, that we only accuse others of a flaw and error in perception because their perception and way of seeing is not ours, is not universal, because their constitution is not so. 6, that there are other entities and forces apart from us. However, since they are essentially unknown to us, they are only manifested by their effects, revealing themselves by a variety of means according to the different ways in which the receiving subjects can perceive them. Therefore, these external matters are mere thoughts, and in this sense, the system is entirely different from the idealism of ancient and newer systems. So basically what he's talking about is, hey look, there are people who are colorblind. They can't see every color in the spectrum. But there are other animals that can see colors that are outside the visible spectrum.
Right.
So, just as some people might have a different way of perceiving things, we obviously can't perceive the totality of the universal reality. So, it is possible that there's stuff out there that we just can't see with the 5 senses.
Right. Certainly, yeah.
I mean, okay, so if you're living in the 18th century and you're thinking about a way to see things that are invisible, see at night. Hey, we got night vision scopes these days. You can, you can pick them up at Walmart even,
Right.
So this kind of thinking kind of opens the door to brand new technologies.
Right.
Heck, if you are working on a magical operation and you're wondering why it's not working, well, these entities that you're contacting, they don't speak your language. They might not even speak,
Yeah.
There's only some ways in which they can manifest themselves to you. And there's only some ways in which you can perceive them. So chances are that lines are going to get crossed a lot.
Right. Yep.
So there's like a lot of stuff that reading.
I have trouble communicating with my cats. So.
Exactly. It wasn't necessarily meant to be interpreted that way. But let's say if I'm looking for, the secret mysteries of like the strange, mysterious, supposedly ultra powerful order and all that stuff, they were not that. I mean, they were wide ranging, but they weren't all that powerful. They were always broke. They were always struggling for money.
I see.
But they were an amazing network of a lot of really smart and progressively minded people.
Well, I don't think I have any further questions. Any other comments or details from the book that you wanted to share? Or?
Well, it's being published by Lewis Masonic. It's available for pre-sale now. £25 British pounds plus shipping, I think. And it's about like 560 pages.
Oh wow!
It's got illustrations taken from the original drawings. It's got 2 essays by Weishaupt that are taken from the famous Friedenkiste, the Swedish chest. And they're part of like one folio, but it's 2 separate essays.
Got it.
Also, it's a translation of the only surviving ritual text in Weishaupt's own handwriting.
Wow.
And the publication date is October 31st.
Wow, so it's coming right up, and that sounds like really a must-have for anyone who collects this kind of material.
Exactly, yeah.
Very cool.
Hopefully it's going to shed a lot of light on what the conspiracy theorists have been, spreading.
Right. We can hope. I think they're just going to say, "Oh, it's just a cover-up." That's what they're doing,
Well, one I've already had one guy on my blog that already started to go that way. And even Terry Melanson, he's the author of Perfectibilists. Which is kind of like which is pretty much the first book that in a couple of decades actually dealt with the Illuminati in an actual serious it was a serious scholarly attempt to tell the history of the Illuminati. Terry and I disagree on many things, but at the end of the day, we still we still talk to each other, we respect each other's work. I know that he's basically an honest Joe. He's never led me down the wrong path.
Yeah.
He thinks that he thinks that I might be a little bit too apologetic about them.
You drank the Kool-Aid, maybe?
I don't think he goes quite that
far.
That's
good.
It's like we're both looking at the same material. We just arrive at different conclusions.
Oh, I see.
It basically just has to do. It basically is all about, how do you feel about what were their goals? How do you feel about the way that they went about achieving their goals and all that stuff? So we've got differences like that, but I think basically we've got we've got a lot of respect for each other.
Great.
Joseph Vegas, by the way, has done a lot of research on that. He's my project partner on the English side, and the American side. He's done a lot of research on that. He actually translated one of the other Illuminati source documents. The first translation was actually done by Miriam Gill. That was a project managed by Sir Mark Brubeck. Lamp of Diogenes.
Yeah.
And but going back to Joseph, he's actually collected a bunch of memorabilia, Illuminati artifacts, and all that stuff. It's an awesome team that I've been working with.
Cool.
Markner and Vegas.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for this interview. This has been great. That's wonderful to learn about all this.
Yeah, it's been an honor.